Welcome again. This starts our discussion and lecture on the last of the gaps, gap 4. So going back, start from the beginning again. Remember, expectations, perceptions don't meet. So now we understand what the customer needs. We've designed the right systems. We've taught our employees effectively. But now how are we communicating that back to the customers? How are we communicating it back? So what's being delivered in terms of the service and how it's being communicated? That's our final gap. That's the fourth gap. So this could be lack of integrated service marketing communications. So we're not saying the same things in all the same places in all the right areas. Maybe we don't have a strong marketing message as to what we're actually delivering in terms of services and so on. Ineffective management of customer expectations. So we know the customer expectations here. We have all that. We haven't educated the customers effectively. We've talked about that in gap 3, and now we're not because we're not communicating it effectively. Overpromising. I'm sure you've seen this. Overpromising in advertising. Overpromising in personal selling. You know, there's kind of a statement that's sometimes made in major convention hotels that sales sells the dream, and conference services the nightmare. Oftentimes the promises that are made by the selling aspect are not necessarily what is actually will be able to be accomplished. Overpromising through physical evidence cues. So maybe we've shown photos of what we looked like a while ago, but we're old today and we don't look quite the same way as we used to. Inadequate horizontal communications. This is an area I have seen happen many times in my career where sales and operations don't communicate with each other. You made a commitment that you're going to allow early check-ins, and yet the hotel operation-wise, the people on the front desk have never been told that, and they don't have the systems in place to do it. Or you communicate something in advertising and you don't tell operations. You create a package rate for a weekend and you forget to tell the reservations department what you're doing with it, for example, things of that nature. So it's an issue of even communicating on a corporate level down to the property level and so on. Very common. So how do you close the gaps? Well, you have to look at your communication channels, your advertising, how you're dealing with operations in terms of that, how you make sure that everybody knows what's going on. Human resources in terms of getting the right people in places and even what they're communicating to the people they hire. And then your marketing, and your marketing communications is critical here. So you have to develop an effective communication strategy and put primary quality determinants into it, right? And manage the customer expectations by promising what you can deliver. Don't overpromise. We go back to the service triangle once again. And here what we're talking about in this case now is we're talking about the company to the customers, the external marketing. This is where gap 4 comes in. Internal marketing, interactive marketing, we've talked about those in previous gaps. This one, gap 4, is about the external marketing, how we're communicating that from the company to the customer. We're dealing with intangibility here. Right? So because we're dealing with intangibility, we have to make sure that we're very careful about how we communicate, show what the tangible aspect is, and make sure that it's realistic. So in the advertising area, we have to use narrative to determine that. We have to present vivid information about who we are, whether it's interactive imagery, today's videos and so on in the process. Going back to the issues we've talked about in reputation, what are the photos that the customers are putting on there? Those are the kind of things that are there. We have to feature employees in our communication. I'm a big fan of that. I think it's important because we're talking about an interaction between people. We have to show those employees. So leverage social media. These are all factors in here. Featuring satisfied customers in communication. Using the positive reviews that people have said about us in terms of what we're doing. You've heard that in the case of the Linden Center and how they do that. And generating word of mouth through employee relationships. Okay, how the employee does and all those kind of things is a big factor here. So when we look at the service advertising strategies to match the intangibility, we have to look at the physical representations. We have to look at the service consumption itself, the abstractness of it. We have to look at the generality of the systems, documentation, performance documentation, all those kind of things. Non-searchability, the performance documents, those kind of things in that area. And mentally impalpability. In other words, we have to make sure that we show something that can't be seen physically, and that's really an issue with a hotel in an area where you've never been before. How do you show what it's really like, and then make sure that when they get there, it's exactly like that? Okay, so those are the challenges that we face in this area. So if we look at the integrated service marketing communications here, so when we talk about a strategy like this, we're talking about external, internal together. This means that we have to coordinate. So sales and service people need to make sure that they're communicating what's there, what's in print, what's on the internet. All those kind of things are, they're knowledge. Everyone in the organization is knowledgeable about what's happening. And then all the tangible cues have to be able to fit within the service scape of what's there. So how's this done in services? Advertising, sales presentations, service encounters with employees, service scapes, internet web presence, all those kind of things. And that's the area that we're talking about here in GAP 4. So where is it done? Internally, public relations department. Our pricing, we'll talk more about that as a separate issue. Pricing tells a lot of the story about what the customer should expect. Service guarantees is another way to look at it. Customer education, we've talked about that in GAP 3. So let's look at these 4 areas more specifically in our goal to greater or equal promises. Managing customer expectations, improving customer education, manage the internal and marketing communication, and managing the service promises. So let's start with managing the service promises. So we have to create effective service communications externally and make them realistic, and then we have to be able to perhaps offer service guarantees. What's our guarantee if it doesn't happen? And here's a prompt for you and your discussion groups. What are your examples? What are some cases that you know? What are those that you would like to see in terms of managing service promises? Second, we have to manage customer expectations. We have to offer choices, offer tiered value offerings. So what we're talking about here is maybe we have different pricing for different times of the year. Maybe you have different pricing for different types of rooms. All those kind of things can be different in terms of what we're doing. In a restaurant, maybe you have the early happy hour aspect of things, or the early diners, or the ones that come in the off time versus the ones that come other times. And that's a way to manage those expectations. And we have to communicate that effectively. We don't want less service to be done because we're offering a lower tier, but we might have less amenities within the guest room, for example. So we have to make sure that those are equal to what the promises are. And again, examples here for discussion. Approaches in customer education. We've talked about this in our last gap, but teaching customers to avoid peak demand and slow seasons, for example. So come in the slow season, we can do that through pricing. We can do that through offers perhaps for locals only. Those kind of things could be factors that we're using there. Clarify the expectations of what the sale is and how it's structured for them, and confirm performance standards. In other words, we want to make sure that we're delivering the same standard that we are, or if there's something reduced in the process of what they're going to get, it's very clear so that they know what they're going to get through what's happening. So if maybe we're less staffed because it's the low season for us, we don't have as many amenities going on in the resort during that particular period of time, we need to make sure we communicate those. Again, what might we do? How might we do this in the tourism and hospitality industry? And finally, we have managing internal communications. So this is aligning the back of the house with the front of the house, and everyone knows what's going on with the customer and what the customer's expectations are. Making sure that we have horizontal and vertical communication, so across all the divisions of the company, and then within that, right down to the front line boundary spanner, if you will. They all need to know what's going on. So if there's special rates being offered, we need to know what they are at all levels, and it's got to be educated to them. So we can do this sometimes by creating cross-functional teams that go across different aspects of the organization to make sure that someone in the front desk is also being communicated to by the sales department and what they're doing, and we have conference services that are able to do that, for example. So what do you expect as a customer, as an employee? What do you expect to be communicated to as an employee? That's my question to you there. And here are our questions for you to go through with your group.